And we are an umbrella organization. We support groups and folks who like to have a some kind of an action or want to work on an issue.
Are you still checking it out?
Hi, Nico. So, I like to have everyone's attention. Anyway, so the Peace Center does numbers of different things. We've been going since 2002 when the U.S. began bombing Afghanistan and then Iraq. Utah Phillips was one of our founders. He and Mary and Russ Jorgensen were among the first founders of the Peace Center. And I've learned many things over the years by working under, with the inspiration of Utah Phillips. One thing I've learned is that there cannot be peace without justice. And so, given the state of affairs of our times, there are so many different causes and issues that one can work on. And I find that to keep my sanity, I pick one. And so I've picked immigration currently because there's such a need right now. I see my friends waving at me towards the back who are, they're Indivisible Women, Immigration Rights Group. I think there's some other groups represented as well, and you're going to hear more from them later. But I think it's important for the public to get some idea of why we have the caravans coming up from the Central American countries. It's not an easy answer, it's not an easy thing to understand, but I will speak to it for just a few minutes so that perhaps we can gain some understanding. So first of all, you have to go back in history, back into the 1980s, 1990s, and look at the history of what was going on in those countries, and particularly what the U.S. involvement was in those countries. And without fail, you will see that the United States intervened in Honduras, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Guatemala, Mexico, of course, we were always messing down there. And of course, Chile and other South American countries. But what happened with the U.S. intervention is that our military, our government went in and took out sometimes democratically elected leaders in those countries, and thinking that we were on the right side, the good side, but that wasn't always true. And in fact, we destabilized those countries by replacing democratically elected leaders with sometimes military military generals and folks that were part of the military down there, so who have now become the leaders of those countries. So, well, you have to go even deeper to understand that United States interests involve the natural resources of these various countries. Way back, I mean, for a century, our various industrialists and big ag companies have bought up acres and acres of land in these various Latin American countries, and they have, privatized some of the natural resources. They have taken acres and acres, millions of acres, off of the from the people who were subsistence farmers for the most part. And so big swaths of land in these various countries have been taken up, have been privatized, have been bought by private industry, and that was not favorable to the various elected officials who were more socialist and had more interest in social welfare programs for the people. And instead, after our U.S. interventions, the private industry that came in were just all about making money for themselves and capitalism, and to hell with the people. So there's the private interests in these various countries, one factor. Another factor was the destabilization that was caused by U.S. intervention. You have to understand the enormous arms sales that have occurred by the United States and sold millions and millions of dollars worth of arms, munitions to these various countries. And those arms were given to the military / government groups, who then turned around and used them on their own people. And if you remember this history, you might remember there were tens of thousands of people slaughtered in El Salvador. There were tens of thousands of people slaughtered in Honduras. And by their own government, by their own military governments. So the arms sales, and then during the 80s and 90s, also in the U.S., we were pretty busy deporting, a lot of immigrants. We always have had waves of immigrants coming to our country, and of course lots of people from South America. And so there's always been, I think there's like 13 million undocumented people in the United States. I think I'm right on that number, but I might be off. And so in the 80s, I don't remember who the president was, but we did large-scale deportations. And a lot of those young men, particularly, who had been residing in Los Angeles, for instance, had really gained the gang mentality. The two biggest gangs that are that have taken over much of Central America are MS-13 and MS-18. Those are rival gangs that actually had their roots in Los Angeles. And so when they were deported, these young people took that same gang mentality back to their homes, El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, Mexico. And as a result, the gang mentality grew with the government. And so now, as we understand it, there are some governments that are so corrupt that they have become the drug cartels, and they this gang mentality they assert against the people. So, for instance, when I was down at the border back in January of this year, I was with a group of legal group that was working with the immigrants and trying to help them understand what the process was that they were going to be facing when they actually were at the head of the line and were confronted with ICE, the immigration services. So without fail, the people that I interviewed were clearly sincere. These were not people just wanting to have a better life. These are people who had been walking and traveling all through Mexico and Guatemala to get to the United States border because they claimed that they were being persecuted by various gang factions. And they told stories of their relatives who'd been murdered. They showed wounds on their bodies. They had harrowing stories to tell of from their own personal experience. So what's going on, as we understand it, is that these two gangs, they're not just street gangs with, half a dozen or a dozen guys. These gangs have tens of thousands of people, and they want you to be part of their gang, and they want you to pay them for the privilege of being part of their gang and not part of the rival gang. So the people, the peasants, and the people who make their way and escape, they're truly running for their lives because these gangs are they're violent, and they disappear people, and they kill people, and they shoot at you, and they extort money from you. So these countries that the people are coming from are completely broken countries. They're destabilized. The governments are one-on-one with the gangs themselves. It's very corrupt. And so these people have come to our borders and seeking our help, and they're truly refugees. They are leaving countries that cannot protect them. And I'd just like to say a few words about the U.S. involvement in creating the refugee crisis, which is all across the globe. We have destabilized and destroyed cities in Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria, and we're helping to Saudi Arabia destroy much of Yemen. If you've seen the pictures, which are kept from the public view, you would see that these cities, after the bombing, they're completely uninhabitable. It's like they have to leave. There's no water, there's no infrastructure, there's nothing there for them. The schools are gone, the hospitals were bombed. So there's refugees moving, there's movements of humanity all across the globe, largely from the Middle East, from Africa, from Central America. And I felt that we can't do much to take in the Middle Eastern refugees, and our country even has a ban right now on Muslims coming in. But what we can do is we can help humanity that is coming to our southern borders and do something to help them. And so this is where I put my energy, and the Peace Center has been doing a lot of work in this way. And we've taken trips down to the border. We're taking another trip in the first week of October. So there's a sign-up sheet in the back there at the information table, and if you're interested to go and do any kind of, there's all kinds of work that needs to be done. There's just buying groceries. There's like our contact, Jill Swires in Tijuana, says that there's still something like 8,000 refugees in Tijuana waiting for their ability to come into the United States. There's not just 1 or 2 shelters, there's 30 shelters. And they are not government run, and they're not government funded. They are funded by good-willed people, churches, community organizations, etc. So she's constantly asking for money to buy groceries, and we've given her money, and we will continue to do so. So the funds that you will donate today will go to Jill to help feed the people at the shelters on both sides of the border. And so I'll be talking more through the evening, but I'm going to ask my good friend Lou Manick up to the stage, because Lou is, he's from LA, but he wasn't part of that gang culture I'm talking about. Don't hold it against him. I'm from LA too. Don't hold it against us.